Today, we'll be exploring one of retirement planning's most common questions. How long will $1 million actually last in retirement? After years of helping people retire, we here at Rubino and Lang Wealth Partners have seen countless people fixate on hitting this magic $1 million number mark without understanding what it really means for their retirement lifestyle. That's why John Conley and I are here making this video today to show you how to calculate your retirement timeline and avoid the dangerous misconceptions around that $1 million retirement. Let's get into it. All right, John. So why do retirees always feel uncertain about their savings? It kind of comes back to people who are nearing retirement focus on this specific savings number. And what does that have to do psychologically?
Well, in behavioral issues, it becomes an anchoring bias. And what that is that an individual gets so fixated on the number, right? Is
Hmm.
it $1 million for them to retire? And as an advisor, that tells me nothing about the person and what their spending is or potential income and how hard their money may or may not have to work for them. So the $1 million may be enough, may not be enough. The second issue I see with this anchor and bias and being fixated on the big number is that it makes people so fixated on it so that the range of emotions watching the market, if the market goes down and you go below that magic number, person becomes very concerned, nervous, maybe even miserable. And sometimes when the market is doing well and it goes above that number, they may get a false sense of security that, hey, maybe I can spend more and so forth. So, but watching it, if there's a correction in the market, people tend to get upset with that.
Can we go into a little bit more about why people nearing retirement feel uncertain about their savings when these kinds of things happen?
I think they're uncertain about their savings is because they haven't walked through a process to see where they stand, to do a real deep, thorough analysis of where am I going to get my income, inflation, what is the tax ramification of my withdrawals, and done a real true study of their situation.
It sounds like, yeah, like people just kind of go back into the conventional wisdom stuff that they hear on, online or through certain media outlets and stuff like that. It's like, hey, I'm just going to go in understanding I'm just going to withdraw 4%, or my portfolio is going to change as I age, or whatever that rule is for a while, right? I'm 65, so 65 of my portfolio should be in bonds. Is that that
Yeah,
works?
yeah.
Something like that, yeah. So, but like again, it's just arbitrary numbers. People haven't taken the time to actually, like you said, sit down and calculate what their situation is and what they need.
Yeah. So when you look at the 4% rule, if you go into retirement thinking, hey, I saved $1 million and I'm going to withdraw 4%, well, that's 40,000 that you pre-tax dollars.
Hmm.
So you'll net something less than that for your retirement years. A couple issues with that 4% rule is coming under fire lately. And one thing is that the 4% rule says that you will take out 4% of whatever your starting value of your account is
Hmm.
in 4% per year with inflation. Okay. And there's a very rigid withdrawal process. It doesn't take a person's personal situation or needs into consideration. It's also an assuming that a person has a 50% stock, 50% bond portfolio, and it's assuming a 30-year retirement. And people, some people want to retire earlier, some people want to work longer. So if you're working early, if you want to retire earlier, that 4% withdrawal rate might be too much of a withdrawal
Okay.
rate. And if you work longer and you retire later in life, well, the 4% withdrawal rate might be so low that you end up leaving too much money behind, so to say, or maybe you didn't withdraw enough to enjoy the retirement that you were envisioning, and then you could have afforded to take a bigger withdrawal out.
And this goes into what we're going to talk about in a moment here, which is like how to actually figure out what your portfolio income needs is going to be and how to calculate what that is. But before we get into that, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. No two plans are alike, just as no two people are alike. What matters is maximizing your life, your money, and your experiences. So, short answer, we can't tell you how long $1 million is going to last, but what we are going to unpack in the rest of this video is the different ways to help calculate how much you can spend, the hidden costs to look out for to include in your plan, how to hedge against inflation and other market risks, and minimizing your taxes. Now, if you're still uncertain about how much you actually need to retire, click on the link in the first description to fill out a short questionnaire. Afterward, one of the partners here at Rubino and Lang Wealth Partners will send you a personalized video breaking down your retirement situation. All right, now, John, $1 million, right? That is kind of a lot of money, right?
Yeah, if you have $1 million saved in your 401k, you can say, "Hey, I've done a good job in saving." It's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money, right? And the reason you think about it, just imagine you saved $1 million in your 401k. That money's never been taxed. So in net dollars, it's probably closer to 700,000. And when we start to look at that 4% rule, or how we want to withdraw from that, you tend to start to wonder if withdrawing 4% is even enough from the $1 million to live your lifestyle.
Right? So if you take a million, that's 40 grand, and that doesn't even include taxes, right?
That's 40 grand would be pre-tax.
Pre-tax. So you could take out 40 grand pre-tax, and then net is whatever your tax bracket is, which could vary from person to person, right?
Correct.
Depending on what that is. So we don't even know exactly what that is. So that could be short of what your monthly income needs to be, because that's 40 grand a year, right?
Sure. Let's say you're like, if you think about it, I need 80 grand a year to live my life.
Yep.
And you're taking, 30,000 or so from your Social Security. You might have Social Security. You might be lucky enough to maybe have a pension, but you're short money. And then you take out 4%, 40,000 after taxes. You're in the 30,000 range. That's still not enough to live your life.
Right.
So that's where, when we get into this and we look at things, is are we looking at just an arbitrary 4% number? Are we looking at, in the early years, I want to maybe withdraw more when I'm healthier and more active? Do I want to withdraw less in the later years, the no-go years, where
Yep.
we reduce your spending by maybe 20%? So that's why the 4% rule, comes under fire a little bit.
And then, I mean, I'm thinking from like, okay, I got $1 million, and then just with inflation and how, up and down it's been over the past couple of years, that has to come into factor with, again, how much $1 million is going to last you in retirement, right?
Yeah, imagine if inflation is at 3% and we need $100,000 a year to live our lifestyle. And part of that 100,000 is going to come from Social Security, might come from a pension. You may be married, might be dual Social Securities in there. But the shortfall is going to have to come from your portfolio, right? So we know you want to spend 100,000, but with inflation over a 10-year period of time, that 100,000 grows to 133,000. And that's pre-tax, right? So you need that after. You need 100,000
clear that,
post-tax,
yeah.
right? You need to net that. So in a 10 years period of time, that 100 now becomes 133.
Another thing we didn't factor in here yet is healthcare costs, right? Number one, they're rising. And number two, it seems like the threshold to have to start to pay fines, not pay fines, but to pay, it's like IRMA tax, right? Is that part of that?
Yeah, like when you start to make withdrawals from your IRAs or your investment accounts, it has a cause and effect on Social Security, your benefits, how much of it's going to be taxed. And you think about it like healthcare costs. Like when everyone comes in, we sit down, we derive a plan. We're always talking about the good things, but we also have to talk about the bad things.
Yeah.
We have to talk about what if there was an at-home care situation. Persons can't perform 2 out of 6 activities of daily living, or they're struggling and they need at-home care. Well, that's out of pocket. You could have some long-term care insurance in place that will help that. That's fantastic. But that's a cost. Oftentimes, people don't count in, like, what if there was a nursing home stay? Their spouse, they're married, spouse is receiving a pension. And people oftentimes look at a pension and say, if I die, my spouse will get, a continuance of that pension. But what they don't consider is, if I get sick and I have to go to a nursing home, that pension is now going to the nursing home. So that's lost income for the spouse.
Wow.
Now you have to make up for that lost income, withdrawals from the
other.
spouse, because the spouse still has to live their life. So we have to consider all things.
And then there's a kind of tacking on to that, and you mentioned it earlier in the video, that longevity factor. Not just, again, how long you live in retirement, but how that affects years of withdrawals from that $1 million.
Yeah, so we always want to take into consideration life expectancy. Do they get good family genes? How long did their parents live to? Maybe the grandparents. We try to get a general idea of what their life expectancy is. And the goal isn't for everyone to pass away with every dollar they've had today.
Right.
Okay. People want to retire and know that they can retire and feel confident that they can get to their life expectancy
Hmm.
and not run out of money. Okay. Um, Imagine a person who lives to age 100 and they're perfectly healthy until age 99 and they experience some health issues. Well, that person's outcome or picture is going to be completely different than a person who maybe starts to experience some medical issues at age 80, 85, and there's at home care costs, there's maybe a nursing home or rehab. All of a sudden, if you're paying out of pocket for some of these things, is eating away or eroding at your portfolio.
And we haven't even talked about really market risk either, right? There's all of these assumptions we're making right now. We're just, oh yeah, the market's going to keep growing a little bit, so your portfolio will grow with it. But that's not always the case either, right?
No, there's always pullbacks in the market. There's corrections. There's bull runs. We've seen it in the last couple of years. We've been on a nice run, but the most important thing is making sure that you have a portfolio that fits your risk tolerance. It meets the needs of your living expenses, and that it can sustain all types or weather all types of market risks and pullbacks. But obviously, working with an advisor, you would make adjustments to your portfolio based on situations, market conditions, healthcare issues, death in the family. These things aren't a plan that you put together and you put away and never think about it. These things you'll work in this plan, but having a plan in place allows you to be disciplined in uncertain times. Because if you don't have a plan in place and you have this $1 million number in your head,
Hmm.
and for some reason the market dips below that million, you might want to react and become more conservative and overreact, and that could hurt you much more long term.
Crazy thing, those emotions, right?
Exactly.
So this is kind of a lot here. Like we're going over all these potential expenses, things that we don't really consider when you're thinking of that arbitrary number, like $1 million, whatever. So how am I, if I'm hoping to retire in the next 5, 10 years, how am I able to kind of figure out if I'm in a good position financially?
Well, we want to go through a process with you, and that process is for myself and my partners to sit down with you and get a good understanding of who you are. What have you done at up to this point that you're meeting with
Hmm.
us? And we want to take a look at what have we saved and how have we been saving it and how that money is currently invested. Okay, so we'll do a thorough analysis of what
Hmm.
you have. Then we'll get a real good understanding of who you are as a person, a family, the kids, and what is it that you envision for retirement and how you want to live your retirement. And make sure that we get an intake of where are all sources of income going to come from. Social security, pensions, you might have an annuity income. You might have withdrawals from your IRAs that are required for the required minimum
Yep.
distribution. So we want to make sure that we get an idea of where all the income is going to come from. And then any shortfall is going to have to come from your savings and investments. Once we do that, then it's all about taxes. What's the tax ramifications from withdrawals from different pockets of
Yep.
money? Um, when is the right time to turn on Social Security to maximize Social Security? And maybe pension maximization. Do I choose option A, B, or C inside the pension plan?
Hmm. I like it because this kind of ties back into like that framework that we always talk about, this PIN framework, portfolio income needs. Taking a look at your sources of income, like you said, Social Security, any pension income, RMDs, rental income, whatever it might be. And then the important part is just like you said, as you're getting to understand people and figure out what their actual expenses are. Not just what people say that they are, but you'll kind of go into, and again, what we just talked about here, like, oh, did you consider this or consider that or whatever, and build up a really detailed expense uh, basically list of what they actually are going to be spending in retirement over the course of their retirement, not just hey 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but that kind of in longevity, and then being able to take a look at those expenses minus what their guaranteed income is gives you what that portfolio income number is, and then from there you can really kind of invert or backtrack. Okay, now we can spend more time on finding out where those withdrawals are coming from, and then really maximizing the efficiency of your portfolio from that.
Exactly. Making sure that your portfolio is set up in a way that it meets your risk tolerance. It is something that can sustain a reasonable rate of return at the rate that you're looking to withdraw funds. Um, we want to make sure that we get a full understanding of once we turn on income, what is the cause and effect of
Hmm.
other um, pockets of money, the taxes and the Social Security. You
Yep.
might be thinking, hey, I'm going to collect $2,500 a month in Social Security benefits, but at age 73, you turn on your required minimum distribution. That is now income that's going to have an effect on the Social Security. So you want to make sure you understand what that effect is prior to even doing it. And when you're choosing Social Security benefits, we want to try to, as best as we can, maximize that benefit. And then, we look at the what if scenarios. What if Social Security does reduce this
Yep.
Social Security benefit that they're talking about in 2034?
Mhm.
We have to make sure that we plan for that. Reduce your Social Security benefit in your plan by 20% in 2034.
We're talking about this not to try and scare you, but to try and bring it to your attention that there's a nuance to this where it's not just as simple as, hey, I retire and I arbitrarily take money out, or I have $1 million, so I'm going to be okay no matter what happens in the market. But one thing affects another, right? If you are taking money from your pre-tax accounts, it could affect how much you actually get from Social Security. You think you're going to get 2,800, but if you're taking too much out of your 401k, that Social Security gets reduced, which actually means you got to take even more out of your 401k, which could again exhaust that faster than planned.
Yeah.
There's again other not fees, but I always like what's Medicare like the again you the more you take from your portfolio, the more you could possibly pay in IRMA tax and everything like that,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So that's another factor to consider. And again, the idea here isn't to scare you, but the idea is to help you understand that working with a financial advisor, I think, is a great idea because they are trained to find these sorts of things or to help guide you through that process. That is kind of a tricky thing. You only get one chance to really retire, right?
Yeah, when you retire, you want to retire properly.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you feel comfortable and that you have enough information in front of you that, hey, I am financially independent. I could walk out the door tomorrow. The money that I have anticipated, that I saved, that my projected income, if all these things are accurate, and we've done a thorough job of really narrowing it down to a finite number.
Yep.
If you're financially independent, it makes going to work easier. That's the first thing,
Yep.
right? Knowing that you could leave the next day and you're okay, so things roll off your back.
Yep.
But it also makes you feel okay. I feel comfortable with this decision. We want to make sure that all aspects of your financial life are aligned
Yep.
and that you feel comfortable with this decision.
That's great. Anything else that we should suggest to somebody before they start to take the next steps towards their retirement process?
I think anyone, once they come into our office and we sit down with them, we go through the process of the consultation and taking a look at things. I always try to, like, especially when they get close to retirement, is, hey, why don't we take a dry run at this?
Yep.
Sometimes I sit with people and they say, this is what we spend. And, sometimes the numbers jump off the page as that seems really low. And we try to narrow it down, try to make sure that what they're spending is accurate. And then let's give it a run. Like
Mhm.
you said, you were going to cut out coffee, stopping at Dunkin' Donuts every day because you only go there because you're going to work. Well, let's really do a dry run of what we think we can spend or what our spending habits will be, and then you can adjust it. It's like a water faucet. We can turn it on, turn
Yeah.
it low, and oftentimes when we do the financial plan, I like to what we call stress test the portfolio. Where if you're telling me I want to spend 50,000 a year from my portfolio,
Mhm.
well, we'll stress test it and look and see what would it look like if we spent 60,000. And if we're only spending 50 and it works at 60, then we know we're in a pretty good spot and that there's some wiggle room for additional spending if needed.
I love it. We talked about why $1 million as like your this make it arbitrary number is not necessarily what it is today or what it was 10 years ago, right? Why $1 million isn't exactly what it was. Why it isn't a number that you should just strive for, and how to invert that and calculate what your expenses are. We also found out again what some of these hidden costs in retirement planning are between taxes and other penalties you might be paying as you're withdrawing from these accounts. I like that we were just talking about what that test drive, kind of taking a moment to try and see if you can uh, kind of do a dry run of a retirement before you actually make that move,
You
right?
remember way before they had the GPS and
Yeah,
you had
yeah.
maps on your phone, my parents would be like, hey, when I was a little kid, hey, jump in the car. We're going to go for a ride. I'd be like, well, where we're going? Like, oh, we got to go somewhere tomorrow. And they did a test run.
Okay.
They did that just to go visit someone. Well, here we are. We're going to do a test run on your retirement, which is much more important.
Yep.
Let's make sure we understand the path and the route and are we on the right path.
I love that. I love that concept. Great idea. And then we also talked about, again, like how to invert, or not invert, but how to actually calculate what that number is going to be needed to figure out what your portfolio income needs is.
Yeah, I think the income that you need or what you spend on a year is a much more important number than what you have so far. People get fixated. I saved a million. Either I have enough or I don't have enough, right? Um, we got to make sure we understand what you're spending, what we need from our portfolio, and what the cause and effect is of those withdrawals to other buckets of money.
Not so much as what you have, but what you need. I think that's a
Exactly.
great takeaway from the end of this. John, thank you so much for the time to go through all of this. I know there was a lot, so I know that people watching also appreciate that too.
My pleasure.
Awesome. And now that you've seen the real reason why retirement savings could disappear faster than expected, you understand why traditional approaches often fail to protect retirees. However, we also want you to understand that this is one of many reasons why retirement plans fail. And the only way to know which ones are specifically affecting your retirement is by understanding how well your plan fits your goals. So, if you want to be sure if your plan is built to last, click on the first link in the description to fill out our complimentary questionnaire. Afterward, one of the partners here will send you a personalized video breaking down any shortcomings with your plan and actionable steps to help strengthen it. Until next time, take care.